Hey everybody, welcome to Hope Unabridged. I'm Angie Elkins.
And I'm Casey Brennan.
We are so thankful you're joining us today. We're going to have a great conversation about intentional fatherhood. Now, you may be watching and you may not be a father, but that's okay. I think that you are going to just find the intentionality in this conversation really interesting and compelling. So our guest today is John Tyson.
Yeah.
So excited for you to meet him.
Yes.
I've interviewed him before and I've actually been listening to his sermons for years. Really cool thing about him is that he actually served a church in Orlando for a long time.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah. So
that's awesome. So he's kind of local.
Yeah. Well, he's from Australia. So I don't think he would ever say he's local, but he spent some time in Orlando.
Awesome.
Anyway, I think you're really going to love this.
Yeah.
His book, The Intentional Father, is just so thought-provoking and so deep. It's just so deep. So which he is as well.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for you guys to meet him. So John Tyson is a pastor and a church planner in New York City. Originally from Adelaide, Australia, John moved to the United States 20 years ago with a passion to seek and cultivate renewal in the Western church. He is the author of Sacred Roots, A Creative Minority, and The Burden is Light. John lives in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of Manhattan with his wife and 2 children. He serves as the lead pastor of Church of the City, New York. Welcome, John Tyson. We are so glad you're here with us today on Hope Unabridged.
Well, it is a joy to be with you guys, and I'm really looking forward to talking.
Yeah, we are too. So you've written a new book called Intentional Fatherhood, and I would just love to hear why you saw a need for intentional fatherhood to be something that you wrote about. What was the need that you saw, and how did you decide, I've got to step into this?
Well, honestly, it started out very, very personally. I have a son who is now 21, but at one point he wasn't even born yet. He was just, my wife was pregnant with him and we found out he was a boy, and I just felt personally overwhelmed. I think I had a lot of wounds in my heart, a lot of things I was struggling with. And I just didn't feel like I had what it took to help him go from a baby into a man in a way that he would end up, functional, healthy, godly. So part of it was existential crisis. Like, gosh, I need to figure out how to, deal with my own wounds, deal with my own issues, and then build a pathway for him. The second one, I've been a pastor in New York City for the last 16 years. I've seen a lot of young men who have not been properly loved and formed by their fathers. And they carry tremendous brokenness, very, very deep pain in their heart. And I wanted to do something, wanted to get upstream on that brokenness and figure out, is there something we can do to change that? And then you look around our culture as a whole, it's a very, very broken. Toxic masculinity, gender confusion. What does it even mean to be a man? And so it made me do a ton of research, and primarily out of love for my son, to walk him through his teenage years. But then I realized when I was in the middle of it, hey, I could be onto something a little larger. There was a ton of interests from my friends. I'm like, what are you doing? I've got a teenage son soon. I've got to do this. And so eventually, when we were hiking across Spain doing the Camino de Santiago, it took us 33 days to do it. And I used my time at night when he was asleep to write it out.
Wow.
And sort of at the end of that, I sort of had something to share with others. So yeah, it was primarily personal.
Yeah, I love that.
That's awesome.
You talk about how there's really no clear transition into manhood for boys. And you decided to kind of step in and address that. But tell me a little bit more what you mean about that, no clear transition.
Well, when does a boy become a man? Answer that question.
Yeah.
It's like, you can't. Is it when they get their license, their first job, lose your virginity, get married, go to college? Like, what's this moment? When are you a man? Well, I realized doing this research that other societies had very clear, formal, recognized pathways to address the psychological needs of a young person whose body was changing, their thinking was changing, their energy was changing, to channel that in a healthy way. And we're one of the only societies that doesn't have that. Late modern society is one of the only societies that doesn't have it. So historically, and this research is a combination of 2 people. It's a guy, a Jungian psychologist who basically specializes in midlife research as to why people in midlife experience so much trauma and feel like they have to change their life. His name's James Hollis, and then a guy named Michael Easter. And they basically did all of this research and said society's traditional had 6 stages of walking someone from adolescence into manhood. The first stage was a conscious separation from the childhood environment. The second one was a ceremony, like a crossing of the line or threshold to the death of childhood, a psychological ending, almost like, hey, kid, the joyride's over, time to grow up. They had a ceremony to make them feel that. Then they were formed around 3 core issues during the next few years. Number 1, understanding the community and its history. So you had a sense of story. Number 2, understanding the religion of the community so that you had a sense of divine reference point. And number 3, understanding the roles that were required for you as a man to participate in a helpful and not harmful way with the community. So they would do all sorts of things to develop those 3 areas in your life. And then you were sent out onto what was called the ordeal. And the point of this was to test to see whether or not you had actually internalized and learned these things, you carry them and contribute with confidence. So it was different in every society, but it normally involved something to do with nature, something that was dangerous, and something that required courage. And they would try and bring out these internal lessons to be actualized. Yeah. Then if you passed the ordeal, you were welcomed back and celebrated by the community, and then you were reintegrated to serve the tribe. So there's this large end goal vision of being a healthy, functioning, contributing member. There's marks along the way to prepare you. And then you compare modern society. What happens from someone between the ages of 13 and 24? It's like high school, college, a few random experiences, rarely guided, often destructive. And it's no wonder that there's such a crisis with men in our world.
Yeah.
That's good.
Right. What was the process that you used? I think in the book you describe it as the arc of life, but can you kind of walk us through, like, what was this that you did with your son?
Well, it was actually a 6-year journey, and there's no magic in that number. It's just how long I had him before he went off. And so, sometimes when people talk about things like this, they'll do a camping trip. Hey, we're going to do a camping trip, or we're going to do an initiation ceremony. And I love that. That's a great first step. But what are you going to do with the other 5 years? The other 1,500 plus days? One little moment is not going to be enough. So I try to do something that was like a daily connection, and then sort of a weekly thing that I just like called Man School, which is basically skill acquisition about how life works. And then these bigger challenges. And so I basically prepared him, initiated him. It went through 4 stages, which was preparation. I wanted to make sure I dealt with my own brokenness. That took quite some time. Still ongoing work, but major work begun. Then I wanted to initiate him, and then I designed a process of formation. And so it did things like the 5 shifts that need to happen from being a boy to a man. How can you contrast childhood thinking with adult thinking? Paul says, when I was a child, I thought like a child, I acted like a child, I reasoned like a child. But now that I've put that behind me, what does it look like to have a differentiated psychology that means you're an adult now? Did a whole section on that. Try to give him sort of the roles he needs to master in order to function as a man well in the world. Like, how do you understand women and treat them with respect? How do you have a life of wisdom? How do you become a leader so you're not just a follower everywhere? How do you walk with God? So like developed out sort of those archetypal, tried to expose him to other mentors and leaders to develop some of the things that I thought he would need. Made sure to get the defining moments as right as I could, shaping and crafting big moments of formation. I sent my son on a gap year. He voluntarily went, so that he would have that ordeal experience. And then when he came back to sort of debrief it, we walked 500 miles across Spain on the Camino de Santiago and closed with a sort of a welcome and blessing ceremony into manhood. So it was a long time. And the book's called The Intentional Father. It's not called The Perfect Father. I certainly have not been that. But it is about like moving with purpose towards your kids and trying to love them and care for them. And so, I tell more than anything the story of how I did that. And then there's a guide of how to build one for the kids that God has given you.
I love the symbolism of some of the things that you chose in your ceremonies and different things particularly the running into the ocean together. Can you talk about that and kind of your thought behind it?
Well, yeah, there was actually 3 baptisms, but I wanted to frame this experience like a baptism into adulthood. So to prepare my son, I built a little cohort. There was a couple of his closest friends and a few other dads around the same. And we took him out off the coast of New York, off the coast of Long Island, and sat him down, like built this anticipation for weeks and weeks and weeks. And by the time it came around, we were like, today's the day. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And so we take him down to the beach and we sit them down and we just basically build a ceremony. There's this ancient pathway into manhood. You guys are now heading into adolescence. You have to learn to walk this. It's been lost by modern society. By the grace of God, we've recovered it, and you will now have to walk the gauntlet through it in the years. So give them this big charge, pray over them. They strip down to their swimsuits and we run into the ocean like this is a baptism and a journey into. And I'd planned that when my son completed this, that there's at the end of the Camino de Santiago, there's a town called Finisterre. And it's traditionally where the pilgrims, after they've done 500 miles, would leave behind their burden and they would burn it on the beach, putting it. And I was like, I want to get to that town so that my son can leave childhood behind and then run into the ocean as a man and come out. And so, yeah, after 6 years and his gap year and 500 miles of walking through intolerable heat, we finally make it to the end of the Camino and we're sitting in this cove and it's just me and him off this tiny little beautiful town on the coast of Spain. And I've got all of these letters from the mentors who've played roles in his life and I sit him down. I just read them over him. I'm crying. It's very moving. And then I just give him my blessing. Like, I bless you. I declare you are a man. I psychologically welcome you in. And then he knew this is what was coming. And so he runs into the ocean and he just sprints into the ocean and he comes out with his hands raised. And I just yell out, I'm trying to do that like this is my beloved son. I yell out, behold, a man emerges from the ocean. Who is this? That was my son. It was just this really compelling moment. And then I did 2 other things. One thing, I got these little tokens, almost just like collectible coins. And I said to him, if you walk the Camino with me to debrief, you don't have to because you're going to be tired from this year. I will give you a maxed out Roth IRA account, $6,000, so that for the rest of your life, you will remember with compound interest the decision you made as a teenager shaping the rest of your life. So, yeah, so we went down to the bank and now every year he maxes out his Roth IRA. Decisions he's made now, if he does nothing else, will result in hundreds of thousands of dollars in time through the gift of compound interest. So I wanted to send him and into the future every year when he checks the balance is like, this is compound interest for the wise decisions I made in my childhood to become a man. So it was just beautiful. And so, yeah, those were the 2 bookends. And in the middle of it, he got baptized as a Christian, baptized as a follower of Jesus. And they're 3 of the most beautiful moments involving water in my life. And I'll hold them in my heart forever.
Oh, I love it.
That's so beautiful.
You said if you walk the trail, the 500-mile hike to debrief, what were you debriefing? The gap year? Debriefing.
Yeah, we're debriefing the whole journey. So I came up with a series of questions.
Okay.
To basically remind him of everything that had happened. So much of what's wrong with our culture is we forget. So much of the biblical warnings. It's like Satan doesn't need you to deny your faith. He just needs you to forget God in the busyness of life. And so many, I didn't want him to go through all of this and then forget it. Right. So I said, let's walk this. I came up with these questions to sort of highlight our best memories, the key teachings, view it. And yeah, and a lot of it, traditionally, when kids go away on things like, YWAM or these other groups, the experience is exceptional. But when they come back, they just get dumped back into suburban America and they just like, what was that? Was it a dream? Did I make it up? Yeah. So I said, let's work through this. Let's bring some closure to the experiences and frame these up so you can carry them in your life. So yeah, we debriefed the gap year and he had a lot of questions about that. And then we debriefed the rest of the time. And it was all like, hey, man, you're coming to the end. This is it. I'm proud of you. You've made it. What have you learned?
That.
And some of those questions were just extraordinary. Hours and hours of just talking and processing. And it was really special.
That's beautiful. I mean, I'm like imagining already like my husband doing this with our sons. But
Right.
so
Yes.
for the person that's imagining that or thinking about it, how can you make something like this accessible? Like how, like financially and just, just how does it all work? Like, how did it work?
Well, so I literally, my book is a how-to guide. It's not a theoretical book. At the end of every chapter, I literally list out the exercises to brainstorm this.
Awesome.
So one of the exercises is called putting your son's story in context. And so I took a trip to Australia and showed Nate where I grew up and, the places that like wounded me and healed me. Like these are the great moments that made me. But in the exercise, I'm like, how will you give your wife extra money so that she can enjoy herself when you return? How will you catch up on chores? Like actually, I'm like super considerate of like mothers in that
That's
process.
awesome.
Yeah.
How that works. So yeah, it's actually very, very practical so that you can customize it for your kids. So it's a general book with things you can do. And then honestly, because it's designed to be a multi-year multi-year journey because you're going to have your son for these years, I saved up money. I denied myself. I took things out of like my budget, my preferences and saved up. And it wasn't, I think we did that whole Camino trip, including flights, food, hotels and everything for about $8,000.
Okay.
And honestly, like I sort of prayed the money in. God miraculously provided a chunk of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm not talking about doing super expensive things. That's what maybe the equivalent of 2 months of college bill in America these days, which just seems crazy, so
Yeah.
preparation is the key.
Was there ever a moment, especially I'm imagining like teen years, like the angsty boy teen years, right? Was there ever those moments where he's like, Dad, like, I'm done with this. This is, you know what I mean? Like, were there ever those kind of tension moments?
Of course. Yeah, yes, of course there were. I remember there was one particular key moment where Nate was just like, why does everything have to be intentional? Why can't I just be a regular teenage kid? And I said, I was like, I understand that, man, but if you're gonna regret these years if you don't become a wise man in the midst of, And so I again, this is what I tell dads to do. Like I'm not talking about something incredibly. It's called the intentional father, not the intense father. And so like well positioned, thoughtful things can make a profound difference. So for example, like I would say, well, what did you do in your daily time? It's like read a little bit of scripture, read a quote, and asked a question. Did that 5 days a week. So you can take the life of David and just read a few verses or scene by scene and then have a quote about whatever the idea was and then ask one question. So, a well-placed question can open a person's heart. And that's really what I was trying to do, win his heart, see what was going in. And, I was a youth pastor. When I lived in Orlando, I was a youth pastor. And I realized like the best questions are not adult questions. They're moral dilemma teen questions. So I'm always putting it back. So like the question that had in all of our time together, the longest answer, I'll give it to you real quick, was this. I said, your friend is dating a girl his parents do not like. You are over your friend's house. His parents are there. He goes to the bathroom. The parents say, tell us the truth. Is he dating her or not? What do you do? So that question there. And I watched my son. He's got his hands on his head. He's like, oh. So that question led to a 3-hour conversation that included topics like Rahab lied and is in the hall of faith. Is it ever okay to lie? Would you hide Jewish people in World War II during the Holocaust? Like graded absolutism. It just went everywhere.
That's cool.
And here's his answer at the end of it. I feel like I'm not comfortable answering this question because it's your son. That was the answer after hours of wrestling. So one question, well asked, can do. And honestly, Jesus asked way more questions than he gave answers for. I'm trying to help them learn to think, to process, and make stuff like that. Yeah, so like just small, simple, intentional things can make a world of difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you, one of the most interesting things, other than just like, did he get frustrated as a teenager? Yes, that's required in the teenage years. Some of the things I thought would change his life, he barely remembers. And some of the small things that I just did great love shaped him forever. And my point is, you never know. You've just got to sow generously, and you never know, like the seeds of kindness or affirmation or even confrontation and discipline, the soil they're going to hit in your kids' hearts. And so you just got to be present and sow generously. And, you know, I tell you, I got a message from my son yesterday. He sent it to me, a voice message. And I dreaded the start of it, because at the start of it, he says, "Hey, Dad, I'm with a bunch of friends and we're processing father." And I'm like, oh, I knew this day would. And he basically is like, "I just called you not to say you've wounded me, but to say thank you that my life is filled with beautiful memories and you got it." I'm just crying like a baby. I'm like,
yeah,
I want to right now.
This is the stuff of life. Now, again, not perfect, and I'm sure I heard him. I know I did.
Now, you have a daughter too. What about your daughter? Are you doing the same thing with her? Like, what does that look like?
Well, that ship has sailed. My daughter's in college. She's out.
No
So
intentionality there.
No, I actually did something different. So I did a thing with my daughter, which is, I'm actually writing this right now. I'm converting it from like the custom stuff I wrote for her into a general, more usable form. I did a thing for my daughter called 50 Pieces of My Heart. 50 deposits every dad has to make in his daughter's life before she leaves. And someone said to me, "Yeah, you know, that sounds like 50 Shades of Grey." I was like, honestly, if that's an antidote, which is like, here's what a loving father does to heal your heart and give you a healthy view of who men are and how they should treat you, I'm not even opposed to it. But it was basically, you know, my daughter's very different than my son. The rule of intentional parenting is find out who your kid is, win their heart, build a customized path for them. So my daughter was very different than my son. It very, very common, probably more mature at her age than my son was at his age. Young women develop faster than men. It's true, especially in emotional maturity. And so I did something that like she basically wanted, which was like, "Dad, I want to have like a whole series of like really helpful conversations. You can bring my honest questions and you can bring your best wisdom and we can sort them." And so we just did 50 really fun dinners, and we talked about, honestly, 50 of the hardest things that a dad could ever talk about with a young boy. And at the end of it, it was in the middle of COVID, so I was a little bit sad. So the only thing we could figure out how to do was we spent 2 weeks just immersing ourselves in the beauty of Iceland. We were at the most beautiful place on earth. So the whole year with my daughter was built off this Frederick Beacon quote. As you know, "Here is the world, beautiful and terrible things will happen, do not be afraid."
Yes.
And what I wanted to do, the last act I wanted to do before I sent her off to college was like, I wanted to fill her heart with beauty so that she would go into college with all of the insecurities and the fears and challenges going, "Yeah, but I just like drunk from the well of created glory with my dad around Iceland for 2 weeks." And it was honestly. So they closed Iceland down again while we were there because of a COVID outbreak. But but like all things considered, a global shutdown, it was like absolute trip for life. It was amazing.
Wow.
That is awesome.
Are you crying?
Yes, like
I'm
the whole
totally
show. It's tearjerker.
I know. So good.
I have to share this quote because it was one of my favorites when I was reading towards the end of your book that you shared. "Let's not be a generation of fathers who push this crisis off to the next generation. Let's be fathers who release blessing and not brokenness, favor and not curses. Resolve in your spirit to do this with intensity and intentionality." Like, I can't think of a better quote to kind of wrap this up. That is such beautiful words, and it's such a beautiful thing that you've done for your kids.
Yeah. Oh, and it's really, I mean, inspiring it feels like not an adequate word at all.
Yeah.
But as I hear you talk, I'm just dreaming about just how to interact with my own children in a new way, in a more intentional way. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Our show.
No worries. I mean, I was going to say, this is also, love is the only thing that can sustain this kind of intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. This is what parents do. Love makes you do crazy things. And when you love your kids, you're willing to sacrifice for them. And I'm honestly grateful. You have to have had 2 wonderful kids that were willing to sort of like go through all of this and be in our house under it.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, our show is called Hope Unabridged, and we love to ask all of our guests as we say goodbye, how are you finding hope these days?
It's look, I'm a pastor, so forgive me, but I'm finding hope in the person of Jesus. At the end of John's gospel, it says, I write these things to you that you may believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life. And that's what I'm finding. I'm finding life in Jesus. And so much of the things that we put our hope in, I pastored in New York City through the middle of it was disorienting. It was so intense. It was heartbreaking. But it's like all the things we thought gave us life fading away. Career, work, money, even location. It's fading away. And we're realizing there's got to be more to life. And I realize I think Jesus is just so present to me. He is life. He says, whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but shall have the light. And I am enjoying the light and leadership of God. I'm enjoying it. I'm not even obeying it or believing it. I am enjoying the life that Jesus offers. That's it for me.
That's awesome.
I love
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you so much for sharing and for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. What a joy.
Thanks for joining us today on Hope Unabridged. We'd like to remind you, if you're watching us on Good Life 45, you can also listen to these episodes everywhere you listen to podcasts.
And if you're listening and would like to see the filmed version of this show or any of our other shows, check us out on Good Life 45 or on the YouTube channel or our app.
We hope that something you heard today really blessed you, and we would love for you to share this show with those you love. So just hit that share button on your podcast app or on YouTube and send it to a friend. We would also love it if you would leave us a review. With this program, we are finding hope in the unedited stories of our lives, and we want you to do the same.